All right. So thank you all so much for being here. My name is Sonia Chakelsky. I'm the director at Hera Gallery. And I'd just like to thank all of you for being here and thank you to Riska and to our friends of Hera that sponsor us and help Hera growing. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary coming in 2024. So we're excited to be here and to have another 50 years being able to host events like this by artists and for artists. So we have Kathie, Florsheim, and Barbara Pagh here today, artist members at Hera Gallery with their show Wrack More Notes from the Coast. Barbara has been a member at Hera for almost all of the 50 years, a good chunk of them, and Kathie joined a few years ago. So this is their second show together. Their first one was in 2020 during the pandemic. Excuse I'm gonna scratch my throat. Their first show, More Notes from the Coast, or Notes from the Coast, was in 2020 during the pandemic, and the artists found that they collaborated really well together and that both of their works were really about the changing New England coastline. They did a residency up in Maine together, and are here with a second show, second rendition, Rack Lime, Notes from the Coast. So Barbara will talk about her work in process first. We'll pass it over to Kathie. Oh, excuse me. Then the artists will talk briefly together about their collaboration, and we'll ask that the Q&A be or any questions be held to the end of the talks, and we'll have an open Q&A after the artists finish presenting. So with that, I will pass it over to Barbara.
Hi, everyone. Oops. I'm not seeing my arrow. How do I get rid of this? Anyway, this is, I thought I would just start out showing you the images from the show, or just two shots. So there we go. Couldn't find my arrow. And landscape has been an important part of my work for a long time. And I walk a lot. I walk in the woods. I walk on the beach. When I travel, I take a lot of photographs, and I work with details of nature, sort of an accurate image of the landscape is not important. It becomes a little bit more abstract during my process of working. When I moved to Rhode Island in 1983, I moved from Manhattan to living on the salt pond in Narragansett, and the water just was, it was amazing to wake up every morning instead of looking at a brick wall to look out on the water. So these were actually, one of these was the first piece that I ever showed at Hera Gallery. And I just thought I would start with that. So other images along the coast, I've done other series, and I just wanted to show you a few examples. This is called Tidal Zone, and it's patterns of sand. These are this and this in the background, and this over here are all patterns in the sand that I photographed on a place called Hunting Island in South Carolina. And then I collage, and all of these things are collaged on top. They're all also photolithographs, and they really came from some different series that I've done. This is out of another series that was called Shoreline. And again, using, these textures of sand. In fact, you can see some of the same images from the first print. I'm a printmaker. I really prefer to work in series rather than editions, although I do editions on occasion. And to me, it's more interesting to use the form of the print to do variations. This was from another series called Vertical Tide Pool, and this is from a trip out to the Oregon coast, so at a place called Bandon. And it was really amazing to me to see these kelp forests, on the rocks, and the starfish and the sea urchins, which all seem to be like really at a big scale compared to what I see around here. Then I started to work in a slightly different format and including the horizon line rather than just working with these details. And this series was called Intervals. And the top one is from Maine, and the bottom one is from that hunting island in South Carolina. So here I'm alternating a detail, the landscape itself, which is recognizable here, with detail from rocks or sand or plants. And it was after this, sort of in between this and the next set, that Kathie joined the gallery, and she and I were, discovered that we had similar interests in the coast. And these are two images out of the show that we did together in 2020. And this one was called Intervals Matunic. And the whole series was from the beach in Matunic, sort of between South Kingston Town Beach and Moonstone Beach. And I love walking in the winter when the storms really, like tear apart the fences and create patterns in the sand. So, and after Kathie and I showed together, we, as Sonia mentioned, we went up to Maine. And in preparation for going, we were watching online. We both attended some online presentations by the Mount Desert Island Biological Lab and the Schoodic Institute. Some of these had to do with art and science, or with the climate of change, the changing landscape. And when we got there, I was really interested in trying to identify all of the things that I saw there, the natural things. This was the view from my cottage that I was staying in. And here's a shot of the water and the seaweed, which is sort of the main focus of the work that I'm showing at Hera right now. And the seaweed, floats at high tide. You see the seaweed floating on the surface of the water. And some of it's starting to, at a lower tide, where it's landing on the rocks on the shore. And this is really behind the cottage where Kathie was staying. And at the lower tides, the seaweed just piled up on the rocks, created this covering. And the seaweed, looking into the, I think in my artist statement, I have kind of a longer definition of the seaweed, but rockweed, basically this is rockweed, which is known by several different names. The Latin is Ascophyllum nodosum, which I have no idea if I'm saying that right. And it really provides a habitat for a lot of organisms. And this is another type of seaweed. So I like photographing details. It's another, like the bladder of the seaweed. It helps it float. And this one, I just like this image. But another detail of the seaweed and a little periwinkle over there. And here's Kathie out photographing. She had these amazing high boots, so she could really wade out pretty far in the water. And eventually I just had my water shoes, but I did borrow a pair of boots from the bio lab. And so part of our, collaboration is like looking at each other's work. And this was, after an afternoon or a morning of photographing, Kathie would have the work right into her laptop. And it was really interesting for me to see her process of sorting and filing and of the images. I ended up with many more images than I'm used to taking, and it was very helpful to learn from her about how she sorts it out. So here are a few of the images that I selected to work with. This is, I kind of sort my images into backgrounds. So this is what I would call a background. And then in the computer, I use filters to alter the image to just make it a high contrast image. And I'm working with a photolithographic process. And that's just to show you what the plate would look like. So from that positive, I might have said negative, but it's a positive. You get a positive on the plate. And that plate is just sitting on a lithographic backing stone. And then the plate itself, you can roll up in any color. So that's just showing you my inking slab. I don't have any photographs of myself printing, but just to give you an idea. And then I start printing on paper, handmade paper that I make, and also Japanese and Korean papers that are much thinner than my paper and that I can use to collage. So here are two pieces from the show that are using that image of the seaweed that I showed you. And they're printed with another image, and sometimes I flip the plate around to print it again in another color. So here's another image that I selected to work with. And that's the high contrast positive. And here are two of the prints that use that image, plus a few other plates. Sea urchin. There were sea urchins at the really low tides. You started to see sea urchins. Actually, I think there weren't a lot of them, or starfish, a lot of periwinkles, a lot of mussels. I saw one jellyfish that wasn't possible to use, too amorphous. I also, at some point during the printing process, I thought, I wonder if I can make paper out of seaweed. And I looked online, got a few ideas about what to do, went out and collected some rockweed from here, from Rhode Island, and combined it. You have to cook it and get the salt out of it and the sand out of it. And I mixed it with the abaca, which may or may not have been, which is the paper fiber that I use for my own paper. And I think the seaweed really shrunk a lot more than the abaca. So I ended up with these very curly sheets of seaweed paper. This one I thought looked a little bit like a piece of toast. So they did not become part of the show, needless to say. Sometimes you go down different paths, and some of them are dead ends. Here's another image that I worked with, the original and the positive, and the print that uses that plate. An image of the water. And again, the high contrast positive. I propped the boat out for the prints. These are two prints that are using a couple of other positives as well. And one more of the water, and two prints that incorporate that. The detail that I showed earlier of the individual seaweed was printed as a small image and then collaged on top. And the feather is sort of my own personal acknowledgement of the Wabanaki indigenous tribe of the area of Mount Desert Island. The periwinkles, and again the positive, and two variations that use that plate plus two other plates. This one has mussels underneath it, and this one smaller periwinkles. And the starfish, which I cut out in Photoshop and then used the cutout version here, and then the original images, again, small plates, smaller images that were printed and then collaged on top. And here you can see the smaller version of the periwinkle plate. So again, I'm using those same plates in different ways. And I just want to end up with a little contemplative, the tide. Stop share. And I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Kathie.
I had a plan before Barb started talking. That's not exactly what I'm going to do right now. First of all, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how you could layer things. We spent some time in a gallery that I happen to have a few pieces in, and piecing things together turns out to be very difficult. I have not been able to do it. The stuff I've done is really terrible. And all of the images that I did in Maine were very disappointing. So I'm not going to be showing you that because I haven't figured out what to do with that shoot, if anything at all. I'm going to show you room 10, which is what's on the wall. And it's a series. I also work in series, but unlike Barb, I didn't plan that. It just started to happen. I've done probably 6 or 7 series, and right now I have 3 different series simultaneously progressing. This is one, the other 2 are documentary about climate change and a coastline that is disappearing in the other one. I first went to the Cape because I had family. My father's brother and sister had a house in Provincetown. And I went there in 1968 for the first time, and I landed. There was a DC-3, which is a very old, reliable plane. I don't know if they're still flying them, but I took one from Boston to Provincetown and landed in the mist and said, I love it. And it never changed. It is home, away from home. And I've been photographing there ever since, sometimes more intensely than others. This series is called room 10, if I could find my arrow of my, there we go, okay. I stay in an inn, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but I stay in the same room whenever I can, and I photograph from there. And the people who work there, when there are foggy days, call them Kathie's days, because I love photographing in fog. And it's the mystery and trying to figure out how I can get lost or make the viewer get lost in the images. This is what it takes me to go off somewhere. This is all equipment. This bag has 2 cameras, 2 lenses, 2 light meters, 120 film, which is a 2 1/4, 3 1/4 size negative. This has, I don't know, 4 or 5 lenses in it and filters and tools of all kinds. This probably has about 20 rolls of film in it. Another set of cameras, 35mm, 2 cameras, 4 lenses, yada, yada. That's the tripod, and that's the vest. And all this stuff gets into the back of my car, and there's not a lot of room for clothes. That's been kind of difficult. I'm really reliant on knowing where the tide is, because the place that I'm photographing has a groin. A groin is just a pile of rocks, basically, that diverts water sometimes, breaks the water. And it's on the right side of where I'm staying, and I either have to wait for the tide to cover it, so I'm photographing across it without being able to see it, or I have to be able to photograph past it, which means I use a different lens, a longer lens, for those of you who are photographers. Without going into a lot of technical stuff, you have to fiddle around with how you're going to photograph what you do by how far away or how much you want in the image. So I often plan my trips by what the tide charts say, and sometimes I just go and hope that it's going to be okay, and there'll be a low tide and I photograph something totally different. I've also photographed the ground. The series that Barb and I did earlier, my part of that show is called Precious Remains. And it was, it's about seaweed, and seaweed to me has a graphic quality. So I got really excited about it. And sometimes when it's not a full high tide, that's what I do. This is shows you how long I've been collecting and doing this stuff. This is in my studio, and these go back to at least 2007. I'm still using film. And I have heard a lot of people rag me about that. I think film has much more nuance than digital work. Once I shoot it, it is scanned digitally, and then it's printed digitally. So I'm not totally out of digital domain, but the prints are much more interesting if they start out, from my perspective, as film. This is my note-taking, which is pretty pathetic. And I say that laughing at myself, because light moves so fast in this place. I sometimes can get the time, literally the minute that the photograph's made, and sometimes it's happening too fast and I can't, or I have to change film. And I usually get the location and the day right. But one of the problems with a series that is now, well, 12 years, how do you title things? Because there is nothing, they're all seascapes, so then what? I started titling them by the latitude and longitude, day, time, whatever I could do to identify the specifics. And that has a lot to do with how they get filed as well. And one of the other problems is, how do you keep track of this stuff for that long? This is another one of my forms of collecting data, and it was easier, but I forgot to do it. And then I stopped doing it, I think during the pandemic, or maybe even earlier. It's much easier than the notes you just saw, but whatever. Sometimes you just grab what's next to you. Once I've done the work, it goes to a lab. There used to be a lab here. They went out of business in February. And so this stuff goes to New York to a lab that develops the film, scans it, and sends me 4x6 prints that are proofs, and I edit through the proofs. And then the proofs go to my printer in LA after I've done a lot of editing, and editing is my worst nightmare. I literally, before the pandemic, I locked myself into the, the trustees room at the East Providence Library because there's too much going on in my house or in my head, and there's too much distraction. I can't get anything done. So I don't know if they accept people at this point because of COVID. I don't know what they're doing. So now I am doing this on the cave. And once I get this stuff back, it looks like that. That's a pile that I worked on a couple of weeks ago. There were 17 rolls of film. Here, the bigger camera film, which is 120 film, and the other film, which is 35 millimeter, and there were 6 rolls of that. And eventually I put all the scans on a thumb drive and put scans on the screen and started to look at the scans as opposed to the proofs so that I could figure out how to number them. Numbering is a really big issue, and it's boring and it's tedious. And if you screw it up, you can spend weeks looking for something that you know you have, but you don't know where it is. And then it's dinner time, and that's the same dinner table as the editing table. So everything gets moved, and I eat dinner and move on. This is the actual numbering process. This is 120 film, and every single one of these has to be numbered. And I'm going to show you how I number them. I've been doing this since I started photographing. This makes it possible for me to find something really quickly. This is actually from the series you're looking at, and there have been 15 sessions. This happened to be from the 12th session, and it's group 1. They're grouped by how they look to me. And this is the roll number, and the name of the series is Between P, and the P stands for Pentax, which is the camera that I'm using. And then the frame number, and often these things go into, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 different versions before you find what you're looking for. And this is just how it's stored. This is a very high resolution image. This is one of the pieces that's in the show, and it's really hard to try to tell you what it's like to sit with a printer and work with them. Every single bit of this image has to work or the whole thing fails. There's my cursor. This line has to be just right, not too bright, not too little. And if it doesn't, the image comes undone. And you also still need to have some detail through here, how much contrast. It's long-winded, and it's also a lot of fun. This next image is a different set of problems. It depends on contrast, and if I didn't have enough contrast, these are little bubbles. Well, actually, there's little sun dancing on the water. And if I didn't have enough of the contrast, you wouldn't see the pattern, and you would not see these little stars jumping around. And you would never see these patterns. One thing that I've learned as I've done this is that there are enormous numbers of patterns. I can't see them with my eye. The film sees them. And sometimes the film does things that I can't see that aren't even pattern. They might change the color completely. They don't manipulate anything other than color correcting. And the only things I take out are buoys if they show up in the wrong place, or an occasional bird that I haven't been able to avoid, or it flew through when I didn't see it. So you're going to go, this is my computer. This is my Hera file. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how am I going to find this stuff again. So that's the Hera file. That's the year. This is the file for session 12. These are all the photographs that I worked on with Jason. And I had to pick, well, actually Mario, who curated the show for me, is an old friend who's a painter, had to pick from here. And he did so. These are the 12 images in TIFF shape, and now they're in much smaller shape. They're JPEGs, so that I could actually transmit them digitally without having any problems. This is Mario's work blocking the show. These are his visual notes. And we had to pick the center. Well, he decided that we were going to do this, and I frankly did not think it was going to work. And I decided not to tell anybody that because I was so nervous about it. I didn't know what to do with myself. And I thought, well, we're here. So, okay, let's do it. And we had to find the center of the room, which Barbara's husband helped do. He actually helped hang the show, did the really critical work. These are up with magnets. And in order to put them up with magnets, you have to have screws in the wall in just the right place. And Jeff put the level up. That floor is like not flat. So he leveled the line for these to be hung. It's not level here, but and then we went from the center line 6 inches out on either way. And then this is the rest of the diagram. If they're 12 inches apart, and Mario had said put them at, I think it was 62 inches, and we decided that that was not the right thing. So we looked at them and put them up according to what we knew was going to be right for people looking at them. And I came to appreciate this. This is the 6/6 that is actually in the gallery. And I came to appreciate what Mario had done afterwards. I really looked at it after we put them up and went, oh my God, is this terrible? Or did I make a mistake by not saying anything? I decided finally that I really liked the way it was hung, because there's white on either side of the of these photographs, and for me that's silence. And I've never seen them hung this way, and it gave me a lot to think about that I had never thought was going to work. This is highlighted because it became the announcement. This is what I see on my screen, or anybody sees who wants to look at thumbnails, and then this is this. And I can look at these in sequence and I can move them around. I can't do it on this because this is a screenshot. It's not live, but you can move things up and down very easily. This is the section of that one print that is the announcement. And this tells me where to find this piece. That's what it looks like. This is how I store it. Every session has discs. They were initially sent to me as discs. Now they're sent to me electronically, and I make the discs out of them so that I can find them. And this is what it looks like in my studio to have them stored archivally. These are all archival boxes, and each one has one of the sessions in it. This is blank because I want to read something to you that I have written, and it's in my bathroom and I read it every day. Now the idea is to get everything right. It's not just the color or the form or the space or the line. It's everything all at once. That's something that Richard Diebenkorn, who's my favorite painter, said. And it's true. It's really hard. These last three pieces are from an earlier shoot. They were session 1. And I love them. They are the same place. They are minutes apart. And I would just say to you that light is where the magic lives. And with that, I think we can talk, Barb and I can talk to you about how we collaborate. Sonia, are you there? Barb, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
You can start.
Well, first, it's been an enormous pleasure and lots of fun to work with Barb. We're lucky that we found each other, actually. We ended up not knowing this, but we both went to the same college. We're 3 years apart. And we start the season at Brickley's, which is an ice cream place. And we missed the end of the season, unfortunately, this year. They closed before we got there. We look at each other's photographs, prints, periodically. There's no set rule. And we talk often, and we walk on beaches occasionally. And it's been, and it continues to be really important to me, because being in a studio alone is wonderful and horrible all at once. And sometimes it gets really lonely, and I'm really glad to be able to be collaborating and know what Barb's thinking about. And in fact, you, Barbara, asked me why I photographed the same place all the time. And I said, I don't know. And then I realized, yeah, I do know. It has to do with place and family and memory. But I never gave it any thought.
Well, I think that, you know, the show that you have up at Hera right now, I could just sit there, sit on the bench in front of those images and just, it's so amazing just to, you know, the 12 of them together, the 12 images, and they bring you to another place. And I think it's so interesting, the last 3 images that you just showed, which I don't know that I've ever seen those, those images. And even though they're from the same place, they look so different. And so it's just the different time of year that you were there, or, you know, the different light.
One of the things that worries me enormously about doing this series is that I'm going to repeat myself. I'm sure that I have not necessarily shown those photographs, but the light is so exciting. It's almost impossible to sit still. I have to photograph it. Oops, I photographed this 12 times. Well, maybe it wasn't just quite the same, and maybe it'll be better next time. And all that stuff is rolling through my head. And some years ago, I did a series on clotheslines. They were Polaroid transfers. And I worked on them for about 2 years. And then I started to feel like the same thing. Am I repeating myself? And I made a deal with myself. I pretended I was standing in front of an inside corner, and the corner was brick. And I had, one of those, I don't even know what to call them, the machines that are used to break up asphalt. And I was going to blast my way through the wall and make a different set of pictures. And if they were terrible, nobody else had to see them. And that's how I proceeded with that series until I finally got to the point where I was done. Well, almost done. I made a few more pictures of that a few months ago, but it's daunting to be working on the same thing and squeezing the same, or trying to squeeze as much out of it as you can that you've never seen before. And like what Barb just said about my work, I love hers because I love the joy and the pleasure that comes from looking at the images, and laughingly have told myself that we can be delighted by Barb's work and you walk across the room and you're haunted. My images haunt me sometimes, and when I'm in a bad frame of mind, I climb inside my images and try to rescue myself. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
So the other thing that I would add about working together is that, you know, if I'm walking on the beach, either Narragansett or down in Matunic, I'll snap an image and text it to Kathie. It's like, oh, you have to look at the, you know, look at this sky, or look at the water, look at this texture in the sand.
You want to tell them what my responses usually are? Damn, I'm jealous. I want
or the winter that I don't know, the storms were really bad down in Matunic, and Kathie's also photographed at Roy Carpenter's a lot. And I said, oh, you have to come down and see what's going on the beach.
Roy Carpenter's is a summer, for those of you who are not Rhode Islanders, it's a summer encampment, basically, with a bunch of cottages, 377 of them. And they have lost 200 feet of their coastline. I've been documenting this place since 2005. And the winter is tough because the nor'easters are storms that are much worse, and sometimes worse than hurricanes. And I set out one winter to photograph the beach, and I lost all the datum. The places I was photographing got covered with movement of sand, and they don't exist anymore. They're underwater. So it's really good to know when you're down there and you're seeing things that I don't know about because I'm not there. So that, I guess that's part of our collaboration too.
So I think we should open it up to questions now. If anybody has any questions for either of us or both of us.
Feel free to just unmute yourselves and jump in.
I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I think that these were both great presentations. The art is terrific, and I have some thoughts about that. But I really like understanding the process, that the sequence of events that both of you use. I thought was really interesting, and seeing the logs and how you keep track of it. All you need to do is think about how you keep track of files on your computer. But then if you have thousands of photos to keep track of, that makes it all that much more daunting. So I enjoyed seeing the process too. Barbara, I'm curious, the prints, I'm not that familiar with that format, but we had a friend who did intaglio printmaking, and she engraved on plates. And is that what you do, or is there some other way that you transfer the image onto the plate?
Yeah, it's photolithography. So lithography is a planographic process, so it's flat, whereas the intaglio is you have your carbon into the metal.
Yeah.
So this is so I'm working with a light sensitive plate, and you put the positive down, you expose it to light, and then when you develop it, where the image stays on the plate and the rest of it washes away. And then lithography is based on the principle that grease and water repel each other. So when you're printing, you keep the plate damp and you're rolling a greasy ink over the plate, and it sticks where that image is. So the water repels the ink from the background of the plate. Yeah,
it really, the results are terrific. I especially like in your work the vertical, where you could see the horizon, and then there were details that you inserted that were vertical. You saw the coastline and then the vertical detail, and that, I think that's so interesting, because there's so much life in such a small area. If you just take a square foot of the beach that you photograph, there's so much going on there that I like to see both the larger perspective and the detail. So I really like that. And Kathie, this is really the first time I've seen these images, and they're great. And the use of the light is just spectacular. Like, in a way, it's two-dimensional, the image, but there's so much texture and depth there that it's really, to me, it's very soothing. So I know when you say you rescue yourself, I could really understand that. I liked it a lot. And so one is real, Barb's got a lot of detail, and yours has a lot of depth. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you for the presentations.
Thanks.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Yeah, this is Donna. I had spoken to Kathie at the opening about, there were a couple of her photographs where the texture was so predominant that I was looking sideways at the photos because I thought it was on textured paper, and it wasn't. It was just the photo. And the texture of the water that Kathie captured, it was unbelievable. So yeah, Jack, I was right there too, like looking at this three-dimensional aspect of these two-dimensional pieces. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. and Barbara, while I'm still online here, it was fascinating for me to listen to your procedure because, you know, where it originates, you know, I had guessed it originates with photographs but the whole lithograph thing and seeing, you know, the black and white images from photographs and then recognizing the patterns in your prints on your paper. Yeah, that is super enlightening. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have another comment if I don't want to hog the screen time, but a question. Did Barb, you make your own paper, and so I thought that was pretty interesting. Our son and daughter-in-law are artists, and on occasion they make their paper to do things, and so I see the process. And when Jan and I were in Paris last summer, we went to Sennelier, which maybe you've been there. They have an awesome paper department on the second floor. It's a tiny little place that the Impressionists used to buy paint and materials and brushes from years ago. But Jan had a great time picking out special Japanese paper to bring home for her couple of artists. And then our daughter-in-law sent us an article today, which I'll forward on to Kathie, and she could get it to you, Barb. But you mentioned that you like to walk in nature, and it's really, you know, say soothing and interesting. And the title of this article is The Nature Cure: How Time Outdoors Transfers Our Memory, Imagination, and Logic. And it's a really interesting article, and I'm sure you're familiar with the concept because you do it. But I'll send it on to Kathie, and she could forward it on to you. You might find it interesting.
Sure.
Well, this is Lori. I just want to jump in and say I found this fascinating as someone who stares at contracts all day long. I can't imagine how you approach the creative process that you do. And this was just so interesting and illuminating for me. So, and I can't wait to get to the gallery to see the exhibit.
I can't imagine reading contracts all day, Lori. So.
Yeah, you chose a much better path. I'll just say that.
I don't know. It's pretty much personality. It has a lot to do with it.
Anyone else? Their hands up. All right. Well, oh, Kathie, go ahead. Kathie, roll.
I know. I didn't have anything to say. I think my bracelet.
No, that's my sister.
Hi, I'm Kathie. Not an artist, but admiring all this work. And I love, since I was in science, I love the science, the procedure and the attention to detail. It's really fantastic to see that. I just have a general question, whether, Barbara, you ever looked at one of Kathie's prints and wanted it for your lithography, or would they translate into lithographs? Could you capture that detail?
Well, the detail, I'm not really getting like a lot of detail. I'm working with more high contrast images right now. I have to sort of master with the kind of plates that I'm using right now. I have to master getting detail, but certainly the textures, like when she was showing the water one with the pattern in the water, I was going, ooh, I like that pattern of the water. And sand, I think it was after the opening, maybe the next time we got together or something, Kathie, and you said, I think the next show is going to be about sand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So certainly sand textures and I can remember getting together, we would meet at the gallery and Kathie would lay out a lot of these, very often the small proofs. And, you know, play around. It was like playing around with a little puzzle, putting together these different textures of sand and or bubbles, you know, bubbles in the sand or bubbles on the water. And so we definitely have that crossover of where we're both interested in pattern and texture.
Yeah. So you would have to refine your technique a bit.
Oh, to get detail like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
All
but
right.
a texture.
The next
itself,
chapter.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Actually, Barb, I have thought about wondering if you wanted to use any of the patterning stuff in your, I don't know what that means, but it's worth thinking about.
Well, that would be a different kind of collaboration.
Yeah,
You could try that.
I'm game. I didn't, you know, and I guess I should talk a little bit about patterns. I didn't know I was interested in patterns. I just, if you spend a lot of time looking at water, that's just one of the things that you absorb. And it shows you a lot, you read a lot off the water with about light. I'm also, should probably tell you, I had a sailboat for 10 years and I would have one now if I didn't have a garden. They kind of can't do both of them, but you read the water when you're sailing. And there's a lot of the same thing photographing. I really hadn't taught much about it, but a lot of what I'm looking at isn't always far off. I started doing these pictures because I had seen a lot of really bad seascapes and I was sick of them and swore I didn't want to see anymore. And then when I realized I had about 8 of them in my bedroom, then maybe there was something going on I wasn't paying attention to. So I decided I was going to make photographs and obscure the horizon line. And the first set of pictures I did were done in September of 2011, and I didn't touch them for 6 months. And when I saw the proofs later, I don't know what happened to me. I looked at them and said, these are really good. Who did I did these. I have to get serious about this. And that's how the series started to be whatever it is now. And I was photographing fog, and it's really hard to get the light because there's almost sometimes feels like there's no light and there's a lot of light. And I made a lot of really bad pictures and still do. And some of it is exposure and also trying to, there's something called reciprocity factor, which Judy Jacobs, who's, if she's still here, knows what I'm talking about. It means the film is not recording in the way that your light meter is telling you it is, because it slows down or it speeds up depending on what you're doing. And when you're doing something with almost no light, there's a calculation you can do to tell you what you should be doing to get what you think you want. And I never do it, I just guess. And then I do it in multiples and hope that I'm right. I know that's not terribly scientific, but that's what happens. Anyway, it's always challenging because the light is always moving. You don't always know what you're going to confront. You see something that's absolutely fabulous, and by the time you set up and figure out how you're going to do it, it's gone. So the patterns, there are many, many different kinds of patterns. The last day I was in Provincetown a couple of weeks ago, it was a Sunday. I was leaving. I knew I was going to photograph that morning. I knew where the sun was. I knew where the tide was. All ready, set, go. Oops, problem. There are clouds. I can't do it. So it's, a lot of it's a crapshoot, and hoping that when I edit it, I get it right, and I don't always. So I don't throw anything away.
Sure, I'm not a mute. Well, it looks like we're just at 8:30 now, so that was perfect timing. Thank you so much, Kathie and Barbara. That was so insightful. And this is a really warm and inviting show. So I really hope that if you are in the area, you can stop by and see it if you haven't yet. The show is up through December 16th. So stop by. We'll be there. And thank you everyone again, and
Thank you for coming.
congratulations to these artists. Take care. Bye.